It was the kind of night that etches itself into a city's soul. Not just an attack, a slaughter. A calculated, deliberate hammer blow from a tyrant who has long since traded any pretense of humanity for pure terror. By the time the sun rose over Kyiv, the toll was devastating. At least 24 civilians dead, among them 3 children. The youngest was just 12 years old. Another 48 people lay mangled and bleeding in hospitals across the capital. Vladimir Putin had done what he always does when his armies fail on the front lines. He lashed out at the defenseless again. But this time, the response would not come in the form of a diplomatic note or a tearful plea to the United Nations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky looked into the camera, his voice cold and steady, and gave a different order, not to the diplomats, to the military. "Prepare a response," he said, and Ukraine did. What followed was not just revenge. It was a declaration, a message written in fire and shrapnel, sent thousands of kilometers into the heart of Russia. Because Ukraine just did something that made the Kremlin burn like never before. The night of terror, Russia's missile flood. Let's rewind to the attack that lit the fuse. Overnight on May 14th, Kyiv became a war zone, not just on the outskirts, but in its very core. Russia unleashed a horde of 56 missiles of nearly every type in its depleted arsenal. Hypersonic Kinzhal, aeroballistic missiles that are nearly impossible to intercept. Iskander ballistic missiles that strike without warning, and even S-400 surface-to-air missiles. Weapons designed to shoot down planes, not bomb cities. The fact that Russia was using S-400s for ground attack told a grim story. They are running out of dedicated cruise missiles. Desperation, it turns out, is just as deadly as precision. A large apartment building on the banks of the Dnipro River took a direct hit. Rescue workers dug through concrete dust and twisted rebar for hours. By 9 a.m. on May 15th, the search was over. So were 24 lives. Ukraine's air defenders fought like lions. They shot down 652 of Russia's drones and 12 Iskander/S-400 missiles, plus 29 Kh-101 cruise missiles. But math is merciless. Some got through. 11 residential buildings were struck in Kyiv alone, 50 more across the country. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha did what foreign ministers do. He called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting. But everyone knows the truth now. Putin doesn't care what the UN thinks. He has settled into his role as a war criminal, and no resolution will pry him out of it. Zelensky, meanwhile, pointed to a chilling detail. One of the Kh-101 cruise missiles that hit Kyiv bore a manufacturing stamp from the second quarter of 2026. That meant it was built recently. Sanctions were leaking, components were still flowing, and so Zelensky delivered his real message. When regular sanctions fail, Ukraine has its own kind, kinetic sanctions. The reckoning, Ryazan burns. The preparation didn't take long. Just hours after the rubble stopped smoking in Kyiv, a new storm was brewing, not over Ukraine, but over Russia. On May 15th, the news broke. Ukraine had unleashed a massive drone blitz, and unlike Putin's cowardly targeting of playgrounds and apartment blocks, Ukraine's weapons had a very specific appetite: oil, logistics, and military infrastructure. The target was the Ryazan oil refinery, one of the largest in all of Russia. At peak operation, this monster facility processed over 17.1 million tons of crude oil annually, turning it into the gasoline that fuels Russian tanks, the diesel that powers their supply trucks, and the export products that fund Putin's war machine. located just 450 kilometers from Ukraine's border and a mere 180 kilometers southeast of Moscow. Ryazan was the perfect choice, far enough to prove Ukraine's long-range reach, close enough to make Putin think twice about which window in the Kremlin is safe to stand near. At around 2 a.m. local time, the first explosions echoed across the city. Civilians on Telegram reported several dozen loud detonations, spreading across different parts of the refinery. By 5 a.m., 3 full hours later, explosions were still going off. Either Ukraine was still sending drones in waves, or the initial fires had grown so immense that they were triggering secondary explosions on their own. Videos posted by the independent channel Exilanova Plus showed a hellscape, massive black plumes of toxic smoke rising into a sky already darkened by dawn. Flames shimmered in the distance like something from a mythological apocalypse. Another clip from Supernova Plus captured the haunting buzz of a Ukrainian drone flying low over Ryazan, Russian air defenses chattering uselessly in the background. None of their rounds came close. The Ryazan oil refinery, a crown jewel of Russian energy power, was now a blazing inferno. The lie and the truth. Who really hit those apartments? Here is where the Kremlin's propaganda machine went into overdrive. Ryazan's regional governor, Pavlo Malkova, trotted out the most exhausted excuse in Russia's playbook: drone debris. He claimed that falling wreckage from Ukrainian drones had struck an unspecified enterprise. We all knew it was the refinery. And more outrageously, that residential buildings had also been hit. 3 civilians killed, he said, 12 injured. Moscow wanted the world to believe that Ukraine had stooped to Putin's level, that Kyiv was now targeting Russian families in their sleep. The narrative was clear. See? Everyone does it. We're justified. But then the video surfaced. In a clip shared widely on Telegram, we see a Russian Pantsir S-1 air defense system open fire. Not at a drone in the sky, at a building. The missile slams into the side of an apartment block, sending car alarms screaming and leaving a gaping hole in the masonry. There was no drone, no debris. Just a Russian missile, fired by Russian soldiers, hitting a Russian building, killing or injuring Russian civilians. So who is the terrorist now? Whether the Pantsir crew mistook the building for a target or acted intentionally to create a false flag narrative may never be known. But the evidence is undeniable. Russia is more dangerous to its own people than any Ukrainian drone. Why this strike was different. Power plus volume now. You might be thinking, haven't we seen this before? Ukraine hit the Ryazan refinery in December 2025, and November before that. What's new? 2 things, power and volume. First, volume. On May 15th, Ryazan was not an isolated strike. It was the headline act in a coordinated multi-region assault. While Ryazan burned, Ukrainian drones were also humming toward Moscow itself. Regional Governor Sergei Sobyanin was forced to admit that air defenses had shot down 5 drones near the capital. In the Russian city of Yeysk, a Beriev B-200 Altair firefighting aircraft and a Ka-27 helicopter were destroyed. A surgical strike that suggests Ukraine is clearing the skies before setting more fires. In occupied Luhansk, a Tor-M2 air defense system was obliterated. In Crimea, a Pantsir S-1 went up in flames. Even a dry cargo ship carrying ammunition for Russian forces was sent to the bottom. Zelensky later confirmed that a Redout 2 U.S. communications system was also destroyed. The message was clear. This wasn't one punch. It was a combination. But the real game changer is power. Ukraine is no longer sending toy drones with grenades strapped to them. According to United 24 Media, Ukraine now produces around 200 long-range drones per day, and the arsenal includes monsters like the Flamingo, a drone missile hybrid carrying a warhead of up to 1,100 kilograms. That's over a ton of explosives delivered 1,000 kilometers into Russia. Then there's the FP-1, 1,000-kilometer range, 105-kilogram warhead, and the FP-2, 200-kilometer range, 158-kilogram warhead. Perfect for hammering occupied territories. Add power to volume, and you get Ryazan. A refinery that had survived 9 strikes in 2025 alone was now burning with an intensity never seen before. The fires were larger, the secondary explosions more violent, the damage more permanent. The bigger picture: Ukraine's strategy is working. Hanna Nota, director of the Eurasia Non-Proliferation Program at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, put it bluntly. Ukraine has clearly gained an ability to inflict pain on Russia in a way they couldn't previously. That ability isn't going away. The results are already visible on the global oil market. On May 13th, just 2 days before the Ryazan strike, Reuters reported that Russian crude oil production had fallen by 460,000 barrels per day in April, compared to the same month in 2025. The new Voice of Ukraine added that production is now at its lowest level since 2009. And United 24 Media reported that oil shipments from Russia's Baltic Sea ports, repeatedly targeted by Ukrainian drones, are down 31%. Cripple the oil, and the war machine starves. No fuel for tanks, no diesel for trucks, no revenue for missiles. It's not glamorous, but it's devastating. What comes next? The fire will spread. On May 11th, just 4 days before the Ryazan inferno, Ukraine announced a new partnership with Germany to jointly produce long-range drones. The goal? Systems that can travel 1,500 kilometers. That puts targets deep inside Russia that were once considered untouchable, within reach. So much more is coming, Putin. Ukraine has proven that it can strike back without becoming the monster it fights. While Russia kills children in their beds, Ukraine burns oil refineries. While Russia lies about drone debris, Ukraine lets the footage speak for itself. The moral high ground matters in this war, not just for propaganda, but for keeping allies united and sanctions in place. And make no mistake, the fires in Ryazan are impressive. The plumes of smoke are visible for miles. But compared to what Ukraine is building, what is being tested, and what will be unleashed in the coming months, these flames may end up looking like nothing more than a campfire. Russia wanted a war of terror. Ukraine is giving them a war of arithmetic, and the numbers are starting to look very, very bad for the Kyiv.